So let's talk about the techniques of cults. How do the cult leaders keep the cult lower down members, the rank and file, in line? They have very strict, rigid sets of techniques that they have employed throughout human history, and they don't waver with them because they have always worked. They've worked consistently because people have still not built their consciousness up to a level where they understand how these methodologies of manipulation work. I call this the techniques of cults, or how to brainwash willing followers who want to give away personal responsibility for their own actions. And there are four main cult techniques: isolation, conformity, indoctrination through repetition, and trauma. Isolation, conformity, indoctrination, and trauma. Let's take them one at a time. Cult technique number one, isolation. Probably the single most important technique, because it makes it very difficult for anybody to penetrate the collective of the cult, the boundary of the cult. You have to physically separate the cult members or the potential cult members from the rest of their community so no reason can be spoken to them, as much as that is within your power to do so. Create an us versus them mentality. We are the family. We are the collective. Anybody outside of us is them, and they are not us. Demonize the outsiders, those who don't belong. The civilians. Somebody recently just told me what police and military are calling us are civilian pukes. One of the big names going around within the cult. The civilian pukes. Just like their cult leaders call them their dogs, their pets, their animals, as we'll get to. Isolation is probably the most important technique. And why? Why is it so? Because you have to cut off the cult members from the knowledge that they could receive from outside of the cult. And therefore, it makes them incapable of changing. Cult technique number two, conformity. Don't tolerate any individuality within the cult. One's old identity has to be completely broken down and reformed. Completely shed and then built back up to something new and different that falls in the rigidly restricted parameters of the cult belief. And you know what? They'll be all too happy to tell you that this is what they're doing to you. In the Marines, they tell people, we're going to break you down, boy, and then we'll rebuild you back up in our image. They're all too open about how they employ these techniques. They use uniforms, one form. Rigidity. Uniforms to create sameness in appearance. And they use modes of sameness in speech and behaviors. Regimented actions. What this does is this builds up resonance. It keeps people locked in step. And they just go along with the behaviors by rote. Like a wind-up doll. Cult technique number three, indoctrination through repetition. Rigorous schedules and instructions. Repetitive behaviors, doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And repetition is one of the greatest forms of mind control, if not the most powerful form of mind control. They put them through obstacle courses, drills, formations, marching in step, etc. Repeated phrases, chants, and songs being employed to put them in a certain rhythm, a certain vibratory energy. Indoctrinate the mind. Give it the belief system over and over again until they believe it. Keep repeating the lie until it is widely believed. Cult technique number four is broken down in two halves, two parts. There's physical trauma, and then there's mental and emotional trauma. The physical trauma consists of high levels of activity to the point of exhaustion, low sleep time and disrupted sleep, high carbohydrate intake and low nutrient intake in the diet. This damages the brain, It puts somebody in a state of weakened resistance. Their body, mind, and spirit are unable to resist the dictates of the cult. They weaken them through these techniques physically. And then they use emotional trauma to weaken the spirit. Verbal and psychological abuse heaped at them continuously, constantly telling them they're not good enough. Unexpected, sudden, or shocking scenarios create trauma, create a situation, oh, you have to jump up in the middle of the night and respond to this scenario that's happening. A perpetual atmosphere of fear. And as we saw in the natural law expressions, fear can only lead to ignorance, confusion, control, or slavery, and ultimately chaos. That's all it can ever lead to. Can't ever lead to any of the good expressions of natural law: knowledge, understanding, wisdom, freedom, sovereignty. Can't lead to any of those things. Certainly can't lead to order and justice in a society. And that's why they employ these 4 overarching methodologies. And you see, I've used images of the modern day cults. But you know what? These are the same with every single destructive religious cult that has ever existed on the face of the earth. The techniques are the exact same, identical.